Derry, Maine, was not just a dot on the map. If the world had a rectum, it would probably end somewhere here, beneath the silt-clogged grates of the storm drains. In 1984, the town seemed sleepy, like an old dog living out its last years on a porch. But Randall Flagg knew the truth. The town was not asleep. It was digesting. Flagg walked along the shoulder of Route 2, and the dust beneath his boots felt like the ash of burned civilizations. He wore the same faded denim jacket as always, its pockets stuffed with riot pamphlets and old keys to doors that no longer existed.
On his lapel gleamed a familiar pin, a yellow smiley face, this time slashed through with a blood-red stripe. He stopped beneath the sign that read, "Welcome to Derry." The air here was thick, like molasses, and smelled of iron, blood. "Well, hello there," Flagg whispered. His voice sounded like dry leaves rustling in a crypt. "Long time no see. Or maybe never. Time in this place moves like shit in a clogged toilet. Slow and in circles." He felt the pulse. Beneath his feet, deep underground, something was beating. Not a human heart. The rhythm of something vast, cold, and endlessly hungry.
Flagg grinned, baring teeth that were far too white for a man who had walked half a continent on foot. Derry had a property, a king-size serving of evil. But Flagg was not a tourist. He was a traveling salesman of chaos. He entered the town just as the clock in the old courthouse tower struck 6. Passers-by instinctively turned away. A woman pushing a stroller felt a sudden spike of migraine pain and quickened her pace, unable to understand why the man in worn boots looked like a nightmare torn from her childhood dreams of the boogeyman. An old man sitting on a bench with a newspaper dropped his hand-rolled cigarette when, for a split second, it seemed the passerby's face had turned into a void, a black hole where distant, dead stars slowly spun. Flagg headed toward the canal, where the water was dark and oily. He stopped and leaned against the railing. "Hey, down there!" he shouted, his laughter flying over the water like a flock of crows. "You got any spare change for a poor wanderer? Or maybe you're throwing a party with balloons?" From the depths of the tunnel, where the setting sun's light could not reach, came a strange scraping sound, like someone dragging a massive sack of dry bones across concrete. And the smell. Oh, that smell. Flagg would have recognized it anywhere. Wet dog fur, rotten cabbage, and the sweet, choking stench of cotton candy left to rot in the rain. It had sensed him. Pennywise the Dancing Clown had awakened off schedule. His cycle ran 27 years, and the next feeding was still far away, but this uninvited guest, he did not smell of fear. He smelled of nothingness. He smelled of the dark tower, and the dust of worlds Pennywise would have devoured gladly, had he not been chained to this miserable pile of stone and frightened little people. Deep underground, in a lair no mortal had ever seen, except those who could no longer speak of it. The orange lights flickered. "You are not in this script," boomed a voice that made glasses rattle in cabinets throughout nearby houses. "You stink of sulfur and cheap tobacco, stranger. Leave. This town is booked." Flagg pulled out a pack of Pall Mall, slipped a cigarette free, and snapped his fingers. A tiny, unnaturally blue flame sprang to life at the tip of his fingernail. "Booked." Flagg inhaled, and for a moment his eyes glowed crimson, like coals in hell. "By who? You, Bob Gray? You're an old spider in a jar." You think that scaring kids in raincoats makes you master of creation? Friend, I've seen real gods. I've served kings compared to whom your deadlights are just a burned-out bulb in a gas station bathroom. The water in the canal began to churn. Bubbles burst with wet, obscene pops. Slowly, from the darkness, a red balloon drifted into view. It moved against the current, held by an invisible hand. Written on it in black marker were the words, "Randy, you're next." "Oh, how original," Flagg snorted. "1950s design. You're stuck in outdated textures, pal." "I am eternity," came the voice from beneath the bridge, now directly behind Flagg, though there was no one there. "I am the end of all things. I am what hides under the bed and in the closet. I am your deepest terror, Randall Flagg. You fear that you are nothing, just dust and the boot of the one who walks behind." Flagg turned slowly. The clown stood on the pavement, white face, smeared lipstick, enormous orange buttons. In his hands, a cluster of balloons that looked heavy as lead. "My fear?" Flagg took a step forward, and the shadows around him lengthened, weaving into intricate, disturbing patterns. "You want to see my fear? Look closer, clown." Flagg began to change. His face blurred. His skin turned gray. His eyes sank inward, becoming burning wells. He was no longer a man in a denim jacket. Before a Pennywise stood the agitator, the shadow that devours suns. Behind him, invisible wolves howled, and somewhere in another world, in a wasteland beyond time, a rose trembled. Pennywise snarled. His jaw dropped unnaturally low, revealing thousands of needle-sharp teeth. "We'll see," it hissed. "Let's see how you fly." They met in the barrens, the place where Derry's streams merged into sluggish, muddy flows, where weeds grew so thick it seemed as though they were trying to strangle the earth itself.
In Derry, people called it simply the barrens. The air there was always a few degrees colder, the silence heavier, as if space itself were holding its breath, waiting for a blow. Flagg walked across the trampled grass, a wake of invisible cold trailing behind him. He felt the town watching through thousands of window eyes. Pennywise did not merely live here, he was this town. Every crack in the asphalt, every clogged drainpipe was one of his nerve endings. The town was his body, and its residents were blood cells he fed on when the time came. "You think you're special," the clown's voice echoed from a rusted pipe jutting out of the ravine wall. "You think that because you walk between worlds, that you own the game. But here, in Derry, I write the rules. I am the screenwriter, the director, and the only audience in this circus of shadows." A thick, yellowish fog poured from the pipe. It smelled of chlorine, old newspapers, and something else, ancient, ingrained loneliness. The fog thickened, taking shape, but it was not the clown. Before Flagg stood a figure dressed in scarlet, a tall man whose face was hidden beneath the shadow of a hood. In his hands, he held a deck of cards, every one of them blank. It was the image of the Crimson King, or rather, how Pennywise imagined the highest evil capable of frightening even the man in black. "You fear him, Randall," whispered the false king, his voice sounding directly inside Flagg's skull, scratching at his thoughts like a worn needle on a ruined record. "You fear that one day he will realize how useless a servant you are, that you are nothing but a petty magician stealing other people's secrets.
You fear returning to the Dark Tower and seeing that your works have been erased from history. Flagg froze. His smile did not vanish, but it hardened, stiffened, like a mask left too long in the cold. He reached into his pocket and produced a crystal sphere, within which absolute darkness churned. "Nice try, Bobby," Flagg said, tossing the sphere lightly in his palm. When it struck his glove, the sound was like a door slamming shut in an empty house. "But you're making the classic mistake of all local gods. You think fear is the only fuel, but there's also the void. And the void is not afraid of its masters. It does not even notice them." Flagg stepped forward, and reality in the barrens began to thin. This was not illusion, the cheap parlor trick Pennywise favored. This was the magic of thin places, the tears in existence through which Flagg had slipped all his life, leaving only ash behind. The ground beneath the creature began to tremble. Flagg summoned a force that did not belong to this world. He was not trying to frighten Pennywise. He was trying to erase him from reality, the way one erases a failed sketch with a rubber eraser. "You're used to eating children's fear, Bobby," Flagg hissed, his form flickering, now a massive raven, now a formless shadow. "But how about tasting the cold of Todash space? There's no light there, no taste, no smell. Not even your eternal hunger. Just endless nothing." Pennywise roared.
Its shape began to change at a frantic pace. A colossal bird, a gigantic eye, the snarling maw of a wolf. It searched for a form that could pierce Flagg, but met only a mirrored wall of indifference. Flagg was not human. He was a function. The sky over the barrens split without sound. Not lightning, not thunder. Something quieter and far worse. The color drained first, as if an unseen hand had turned the saturation knob all the way down. Then the air folded inward, like paper creased too many times. Flagg felt it immediately. Deadlights. They did not shine. They uncovered. A tearing away of the skin of the world, revealing what had always been underneath. Light that was not light. Geometry that refused to obey angles. Motion without direction. To look at them directly was to understand how small thought truly was. Pennywise screamed, not in fear, but in triumph. The clown's body ruptured like wet paper. What emerged was vast, spidered, wrong. Eyes opened where no eyes should be. Each one reflected a different childhood bedroom, a different final breath taken in terror. This was not a mask now. This was it. "You do not belong here, Walker," the Deadlights said without sound. The words formed inside Flagg's skull, crushing, radiant. "You walk paths that end. I am the path. I am the loop. I am the scream that never finishes." Flagg staggered. For the first time since the beginning of the encounter, his boots slid back in the dirt. The Deadlights were not magic. They were not illusion. They were a force older than spells, older than names. They were what remained when meaning burned away. Flagg had seen them once before, beyond a thin place near the edge of Endworld, and he had not forgotten the sensation, like being peeled open, layer by layer, until even memory begged to die. But he smiled, because behind the Deadlights, far, impossibly far, something else answered. The tower. Not visible, not audible, but present.
a pressure, like gravity made moral. The dark tower did not blow or roar. It simply was, and everything else arranged itself around that fact. Flagg dropped to one knee. Pennywise laughed. The sound was a million cracked throats exhaling at once. "Yes," the creature purred. "Kneel. You know what I am. You know I cannot be killed. I return. I always return." Flagg pressed his palm into the mud. The earth hissed where his skin touched it. "You misunderstand," he said quietly. "I'm not kneeling to you." He reached inward, not for a spell, not for a name, but for alignment, for the thin black thread that tied him to the tower whether he liked it or not. The thing he had run from his entire existence. The tower did not love him. The tower did not forgive. But it used. A sound like a bell struck underwater rolled through the barrens. The deadlights faltered. For the first time, Pennywise recoiled. "What is that?" it demanded. Flagg rose, his outline blurring, stretching, becoming something taller, emptier. His eyes went black, not with darkness, but with depth. "That," he said, "is inevitability." The ground cracked open, not downward but sideways. Space bent into a corridor of screaming angles. For a fraction of a second, Pennywise glimpsed something beyond the deadlights, a spiral staircase of bone and stars, rising forever. The tower's shadow passed over Derry, not to destroy, to judge. Pennywise shrieked as part of its vastness was torn loose, dragged screaming into the fold between worlds. Not the whole of it, no, that was impossible, but a piece, a core, a wound that would never fully heal. Flagg collapsed to one knee again, gasping now. Blood ran from his nose, black and smoking where it hit the dirt. The sky sealed itself shut. The barrens were suddenly quiet. Too quiet. Pennywise's remaining form retreated into the drains, into the soil, into the town itself. Its voice lingered, faint but venomous. "This is not over," it whispered. "You've marked yourself, man in black. The tower takes payment. Always." Flagg wiped his mouth and laughed weakly. "I know," he said. "It always does." He was a herald of the end. Derry did not know how to forget. It only knew how to bury its secrets deeper, the way a dog buries a gnawed bone. But this time, the ground was too hard. Mike Hanlon sat in the silence of the public library, surrounded by the smell of old paper and dust. An issue of the Derry News from 1957 lay open in front of him, but the lines blurred before his eyes. A heavy, cast-iron pain hammered at his temples. He could feel that the city had changed. It was as if a new, shrill note had been woven into the familiar symphony of horror he had almost grown used to, a sound like a rusty saw screeching across glass. He walked to the window. Down below, on the square, lay a red balloon. It was not floating. It simply rested on the asphalt, deflated and shriveled, like a discarded organ. "He's gone, Mike," a whisper sounded behind him. Mike spun around sharply, but the reading room was empty. Only the shadows cast by the bookshelves seemed longer and sharper than usual. "But he left a gift," the voice continued, now sounding like a blend of creaking swing chains and Pennywise laughter. "He brought real winter here. Not the kind with snow. The kind that lives inside. Mike looked down at his hands and saw that they were dusted with a thin layer of ash. He blinked, and the ash vanished, but the cold sensation remained. Flagg had not merely defeated Pennywise in a contest of wills, he had desecrated the very concept of fear in this town. Now the children of Derry would fear more than just the monster in the drain. They would fear the emptiness in their parents' eyes. They would fear the idea that the world was a joke without a punchline. It was a nihilistic infection that the man in black spread like a plague. And against that sickness, the Losers Club had no cure. Flagg built a fire on the border between Maine and New Hampshire. He sat on an overturned Coca-Cola crate, watching blue sparks of magic, the lingering residue of his clash with the Deadlights, still flicker faintly across his palms. He thought about the creature beneath Derry. Bob Gray. Pennywise. It. Good old it, Flagg muttered, pulling a coal from the fire and lighting a cigarette with it. Glamour. A beast from the primordial dark. He felt something like professional envy toward the clown, mixed with contempt. Pennywise was a creature of instinct, a perfect predator, but one without imagination. It was trapped in its cycle like a squirrel in a wheel, doomed forever to eat and sleep, sleep and eat. Flagg, on the other hand, was an architect. He built empires out of ash and destroyed them for the pleasure of watching people writhe. Fear, to him, was not food, but a tool, a musical instrument on which he played a requiem for humanity. "You're too attached to your props, Bobby," Flagg said to the empty night. "You need sewers. You need red balloons. You need grease paint. All I need is a random passerby and one small, dirty thought in his head." He pulled a small trophy from the pocket of his jacket, a clown's orange pom-pom he had torn free during the clash in the barrens. The pom-pom still pulsed faintly, giving off the smell of rotten sugar. Flagg tossed it in his palm once, then threw it into the fire. For a moment the flames flared bright orange, and a distant, pain-filled scream echoed across the night sky, heard only by stray dogs and the insane. "Ka is not just a wheel," Flagg smirked, adjusting his dusty boots. "Ka is a mill. And today I threw sand into your grindstones, old spider. Let's see how you chew bones next time." When the first rays of sunlight began to pierce the mist, Randall Flagg was already standing by the roadside, ready to move on. America stretched out before him, vast, sinful, riddled with hidden cracks and dormant malice. His playground. He looked back toward where Derry lay hidden beyond the trees. The town appeared as a grey smudge against the dawn. Flagg knew Pennywise was licking its wounds. It would survive. It would wait out its 27 years. But now, in its ancient dreams, there would be a new image of a man in a denim jacket who had not been afraid of the lights. Flagg felt a surge of strength. The clash with ancient evil had stoked his own darkness. He felt young again, so far as one who remembered the birth of stars could feel young. He pulled a marker from his inner pocket and walked over to a road sign. Beneath the name of the next town, he scrawled his trademark symbol in a bold hand, an eye inside a pyramid, and a smiley face pierced by a bullet. "The show must go on," he sang, mimicking the voice of a radio DJ from hell. He strode down the asphalt, and with every step the world seemed to grow slightly less real, slightly more fragile. Thin places in reality responded to his presence with a low hum. Somewhere in another world, Roland Deschain may have felt a brief chill and tightened the belt on his revolver. Somewhere in Las Vegas, people with empty eyes were beginning to gather. Flagg walked toward his destiny. and his shadow on the road was longer and darker than it should have been beneath such a sun. He was not a hero. He was not even an antagonist in the usual sense. He was the whisper outside the window that makes you check the lock on your door twice. Deep beneath Derry, in the stinking darkness of the storm drains, Pennywise stared at its hands and saw blackened burns etched into the flesh, marks that refused to heal. The clown opened its mouth and tried to laugh, but instead only a dry, rasping cough came out, carrying the smell of Nebraska road dust. Two evils had gone their separate ways, retreating to their own corners, but the thread between them remained taut, and that thread led straight to the center, to the Dark Tower, where all stories eventually came to an end. Flagg vanished beyond the bend in the road, whistling a tune that made flowers wilt. Derry was just a town again, but now it was a town that knew. There were things far worse than a clown in the sewers, and those things wore denim jackets and smiled at you from dusty highways. Billy Ray, the pickup driver, did not make it home until noon. He locked himself in his room, drew the curtains, and sat in the corner with his arms wrapped around his knees. When his wife asked him what had happened, he only looked at her with eyes that no longer held any light. "He said the door was open," Billy Ray whispered. "He said we were all just fed." On the refrigerator in their kitchen hung a child's drawing, held up by a magnet, a funny clown with balloons. That night, Billy Ray tore it down and burned it in an ashtray, his hand shaking as he struck the match. But even as the paper turned to ash, he felt as though two kinds of eyes were watching him from the corners of the room. One pair, orange and hungry, and the other, human, brown, and endlessly bored. And it was impossible to say which were worse.